He placed a chess clock on the table, slid a check for 100 million across the marble, and smirked. He had destroyed CEOs, senators, and grandmasters at this game. He thought I was just a pretty heiress with a trust fund. He had no idea what was coming. If you've ever been underestimated, counted out, or dismissed, stay until the end, because what happened in that room changed everything. Hit subscribe, because we don't tell ordinary stories here. Tease the emotional payoff, a single chess move that cost him an empire. I was 11 years old the first time I understood what it meant to lose everything. Not lose it slowly. Not the kind of loss that gives you time to grieve, to prepare, to say goodbye. I mean, the kind of loss that happens on a Tuesday morning while you're eating cereal before school, and your whole world is still normal. And then your father walks into the kitchen, sits down across from you, and just stares at his hands like he doesn't recognize them anymore. He didn't cry. My father never cried. Roland Calloway was the kind of man who had built something from absolute nothing, a real estate empire that started with one broken-down property in a city that had given up on itself. He worked 18-hour days for 15 years. He missed birthdays. He missed recitals. He missed the small, ordinary moments that most fathers take for granted. And he did all of it because he believed that one day the sacrifice would mean something. That one day he would hand me and my mother a life that was safe, solid, ours. That Tuesday morning, he had just signed the papers that took it all away. He didn't explain the details to me then. I was too young, but I understood enough. I understood that the men who sat across from him in those boardrooms, men with lawyers and loopholes and 17 ways to win a war before the other person even knows the war has started, had found a way to push him out of his own company, a company that had his name on it, a company he had bled for. And one of those men, the one who architected the whole thing, the one who saw Roland Calloway's vulnerability and moved on it without hesitation, was a man named Dorian Voss. I didn't know his name yet, but I would learn it. What I remember most from that period isn't the lawyers coming to the house. It isn't the articles in the financial papers or the whispers at school when word got around that my father wasn't who he used to be. What I remember most is the silence at the dinner table, the way my mother would reach over and put her hand on top of my father's, and he would nod like he was trying to convince himself that nod meant something. He never fully came back from it. The man who raised me, the one who used to walk through a room like he owned the floor beneath his feet, quietly disappeared. What was left looked like my father, sounded like him, but something essential had been taken, something that no amount of time or love or new beginnings could completely restore. I watched that happen every single day for the rest of my childhood, and I made myself one promise, quietly, without telling a soul, never again, not to him, not on my watch. I had waited 18 years for the moment I would finally stand in the same room as Dorian Voss. I had imagined it 1,000 times, in the quiet of my apartment at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling. During long train rides, when the city blurred past the window and my mind drifted back to that kitchen, to my father's hands, to the silence that never really left our house, I had imagined walking up to this man and making him feel, even for 1 second, the weight of what he had casually destroyed. But when the moment actually came, standing in the middle of his glittering gala, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and men in suits who all laughed at exactly the right moments, I felt something I hadn't prepared for. I felt how small he had made us. Not me, not anymore, but the memory of us, the version of our family that existed before him. My father in his best suit, proud and unbreakable. My mother setting the dinner table like the world was still good. Me, 11 years old, with no idea that some people move through life treating other people's dreams like obstacles to clear away. Dorian Voss worked the room with the ease of someone who had never once doubted his right to be the most important person in any space he entered. He was older now, silver at his temples. A laugh that was just a little too loud, just deliberate enough to remind everyone around him who held the power. I watched him for almost an hour before he noticed me. When he did, his eyes lingered for just a moment, the way powerful men look at women they find interesting and irrelevant at the same time. A look that says, "You're decorative, but not dangerous." I walked over, I introduced myself simply. Just Vivian, no last name, no context, nothing that would give him a reason to actually look at me. We made small talk. He was charming in that practiced, hollow way, and then, in a pause that felt completely natural, I said it, quietly, almost gently. "I heard you've never lost at chess. I don't believe that." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, amusement, the particular amusement of a man who has never had to take a challenge seriously because no one has ever made him. He offered a friendly game on the spot. I declined. "I don't play friendly games." I walked away, and I knew without looking back that I had just pulled a thread he wouldn't be able to stop pulling. 3 days later, his lawyer called mine. The formal challenge arrived in writing. $100 million if I won. My firm's consulting rights transferred to Voss Industries if I lost. Clean, legal, binding. My advisor Petra read it 3 times and then looked at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. But when his lawyer called back, waiting for my answer, I gave them one quiet addition to the terms. One condition that made his legal team pause, check with Dorian, and then call back 20 minutes later with his answer. If I win, I want the original Callaway Group deed returned. All of it. Every asset, every property, everything. There was a long silence on the phone, and then they said he had laughed. He agreed immediately, because to him it was still a joke, a beautiful, harmless, entertaining joke. A young woman playing at power in a world she didn't understand. He agreed because he was absolutely certain he could not lose. He still didn't know my last name. Nobody sees the years before the moment. That's the part that never makes it into the story. Everyone wants the climax, the confrontation, the winning move, but nobody asks about the Tuesday nights alone in a bare apartment, a chessboard on the kitchen table, eyes burning from exhaustion, replaying the same losing position for the 4th hour in a row because you still haven't figured out where you went wrong. Nobody asks about the sacrifices that happen in the dark, in the quiet, in the spaces between the life you're living and the mission you're carrying that you can't explain to anyone. I started 4 years before that gala, not because I knew exactly when the moment would come, but because I knew it had to come. And when it did, I refused to be unprepared. I found Ilya Renkov through a contact who owed me a favor. He was a former Soviet chess grandmaster, brilliant in a way that felt almost painful to be around. He had fallen far from the world that once celebrated him, drinking too much, living in a 2-room apartment with chess books stacked against every wall like they were holding the building up. When I told him what I needed and why, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your opponent, does he play to win or does he play to be seen winning?" I thought about Dorian Voss, about that laugh. "He plays to be seen winning," I said. Ilya nodded slowly. "Then he is already half defeated. Now we handle the other half." We trained in secret, early mornings, late nights, weekends that disappeared entirely. He was ruthless in the way only someone who truly loves something can be ruthless. He didn't let me celebrate small progress. He didn't comfort me when I lost. He simply reset the board and made me go again, and again, and again. I studied every recorded match of Dorian Voss I could find. There weren't many, he was private about it, but there were enough. And Ilya was right. There was a pattern. In the middle game, when Dorian sensed victory approaching, he became slightly careless. Not obviously. That arrogance was the door I was going to walk through, but the training almost broke me before it ever built me. There was one night, 8 months in, when I sat at that kitchen table at midnight and I just stopped. I put my hands flat on the board. I didn't cry. I was too tired to cry. I just sat there in the silence of my apartment and thought about whether any of this was actually worth it, whether I was chasing something real or just dragging the ghost of my father's pain through my own life because I didn't know how to put it down. Petra found me like that. She stood in the doorway, looked at the board, looked at me, and sat down across from where I was slumped. She didn't say anything for a while. That was the thing about Petra. She understood that some silences needed to be sat in before they could be spoken through. Finally, she asked softly, "Is this about the company, or is this about your dad?" I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out, because the truth was something I hadn't let myself say out loud even once in 4 years. The truth was that the company was just the shape of it, the container, the thing I could point to and measure and fight for in a way that the world would understand. But underneath all of it, underneath the training and the strategy and the years of quiet preparation, was just a daughter who never stopped hurting for her father, who never stopped seeing his hands on that kitchen table, who never stopped believing that someone should have fought for him when the world decided he didn't matter anymore. I couldn't fight for him then. I was 11 years old, but I wasn't 11 anymore. I looked at Petra and said the only true thing I had. Both, it's both. She reached across the board, moved upon exactly 1 square forward, and said, "Then let's make sure you're ready." We trained for 3 more years after that night. The morning of the match, I woke up before my alarm. I lay in the dark for a long time, completely still, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in 4 years, I didn't think about chess. I didn't run positions in my head or rehearse opening sequences, or mentally map the trap I had been building, move by move for months. I just thought about my father, about the way he used to hum quietly to himself while making Sunday breakfast, back when the world still felt like it belonged to us, before the Tuesday that changed everything. I got dressed slowly. No jewelry, simple black dress. I wanted nothing on my body that could be read as trying too hard. I wanted to walk into that room looking like someone who had simply shown up, not someone who had spent 4 years preparing for this exact morning. Petra was waiting outside my door. She looked at me the way you look at someone you love before they walk into something you can't follow them into. She straightened my collar, even though it didn't need straightening. Then she hugged me, tight, brief, the kind of hug that carries everything words can't hold. She whispered, "He has no idea." I nodded, and we walked. Voss Tower at 40 floors up felt like standing inside a cloud. The boardroom was cold in that deliberate architectural way, all glass and steel and silence, designed to make you feel that everything happening here was important and permanent and beyond the reach of ordinary people. Dorian was already seated when I arrived. He looked rested, comfortable, surrounded by 7 members of his board of directors who sat along the wall like a private audience at a private theater. He had brought witnesses. Of course he had. This was, to him, a performance. He stood when I entered, offered his hand. "You're braver than I expected," he said. I shook his hand and said nothing. We sat. The clock was set, and the game began. The first 20 moves belonged to him, and I let them. He was everything I had studied on paper, but more imposing in person. Every move precise and unhurried, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who has never had a reason to rush. His board members watched with expressions of mild, satisfied anticipation, like men waiting for a pleasant and entirely predictable conclusion. I played carefully, deliberately, passively. I could feel the energy in the room shifting slowly in his favor, that collective settling in of people who believe they already know how a story ends. Dorian leaned back slightly after his 20th move, the way a person leans back when they begin to feel comfortable. That was what I was waiting for. Move 27. I reached out, wrapped my fingers around my queen, the most powerful piece on the board, the piece every instinct screams to protect, and I sacrificed her. placed her directly in the path of his bishop, completely exposed, completely intentional. The room didn't react loudly. It was more than that. It went the kind of quiet that only happens when something genuinely unexpected enters a space filled with people who thought they had seen everything. Dorian stared at the board. Then he looked up at me, really looked for the first time, with something new behind his eyes. Not quite concern, but the first faint shadow of it. "Interesting," he said quietly. "Reckless." I said nothing. What happened over the next 14 moves, I cannot fully describe in words, not because I don't remember, but because the memory lives in my body more than my mind. Every piece I moved felt like breathing, like something that had been wound unbearably tight for 4 years was finally, slowly releasing. His defense, which had looked impenetrable 20 minutes earlier, began to come apart in the quiet, inevitable way that things come apart when the damage has been building from somewhere the eye couldn't reach. The whispers along the wall stopped completely. One of his board members leaned forward. Dorian's jaw tightened. Move 41. I placed my rook, and the path to checkmate in 3 opened up on the board between us like a door that had always been there, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. He saw it the moment I released the piece. I watched it cross his face, not panic, but something worse. Recognition. The specific, terrible recognition of a brilliant man understanding too late that he has been led exactly where someone else wanted him to go. He stared at the board for a long time. When he finally looked up, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, stripped of the performance, just a man in a cold room genuinely asking, "Who are you? Really?" And I let the silence breathe for one long moment. For my father, for the kitchen table, for 18 years of a man who never fully straightened his shoulders again. "I'm Roland Calloway's daughter," I said. "You signed the papers that took everything from him. You didn't even remember his name. I've been waiting a very long time for this." Nobody in that room made a sound. Move 44, checkmate, nobody clapped. I had imagined this moment so many times over 4 years that I think some part of me had unconsciously scripted an ending with noise, with some kind of release. The way moments like this happen in films. Music swelling, faces crumbling, the satisfying crash of a world coming apart loudly enough for everyone to hear. But the reality of it was quieter than anything I had prepared for. Dorian Voss sat across from me in that cold glass room, and for the first time in what I suspect was decades, he had absolutely nothing to say. The men along the wall didn't move. Nobody reached for their phones. Nobody whispered. It was as though the room itself was holding its breath, unsure of what kind of world it was waking up into now that the outcome had landed. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked out. The deed to Calloway Group was transferred within 72 hours. His lawyers were efficient about it, the way people are efficient when they want something humiliating concluded as quickly and quietly as possible. There were no phone calls from Dorian. No messages, no acknowledgement beyond the legal paperwork arriving in clean, precise order, as though this were simply a routine transaction and not the unraveling of something he had spent 20 years believing was permanently his. I sat in my apartment the night the transfer was confirmed and held the document in both hands. Just held it. The paper was ordinary, standard legal weight, standard font, standard formatting, but my hands were shaking in a way I couldn't control because I knew what this paper had cost. Not just the 4 years of preparation, not just the sleepless nights and the sacrificed weekends and the 1,000 times I had second-guessed myself in the dark. I knew what it had cost my father, long before I ever decided to fight for it. The story leaked 3 days later. Not from me, not from Petra. It came from inside Dorian's own circle. One of the board members who had sat along that wall and watched everything unfold couldn't keep it contained. And once it was out, it moved the way only a story with perfect, devastating irony can move. Financial media, business publications, social media, everywhere, all at once. The headline that appeared most frequently was almost too clean to be real. Billionaire loses company deed in chess match to daughter of man he ruined. Dorian Voss was not destroyed by it. He was too powerful, too insulated, too deeply embedded in structures that protect men like him from true consequences. His company continued, his wealth remained, the world did not end for him. But something else happened, something I hadn't fully anticipated, and something that turned out to be far more brutal than any financial consequence could have been. He had to watch me build. Within 6 months of reclaiming the deed, Callaway Group was operational again, not as a symbol, not as a statement, as a real, functioning, growing company that I had structured carefully during the years I was supposed to be doing nothing but waiting quietly in a world he controlled. Within 18 months, we had signed 3 of his longest-standing clients, not through sabotage, not through manipulation, simply by being better, more attentive, more present than an empire that had grown too large and too comfortable to remember that clients are people, not assets. He had to see our name in the same publications as his, had to watch the company he had dismissed as a relic become something the industry was paying attention to. And because of the story, because everyone now knew exactly who we were and exactly how we had gotten here, every milestone we reached carried the full weight of where we had come from. That, more than the chess match, more than the deed, more than any single moment, that was the brutal part. Not a loud destruction, a slow, public, undeniable replacement. I went to see my father on a Sunday, drove the same roads I had driven my whole childhood, past the same houses and corner stores and unremarkable intersections that somehow still felt like the physical shape of who I was. He was in the garden when I arrived, older now, moving more carefully, but outside in the light, which felt like something. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't walk him through the years of training or the gala or the match or the 44 moves that had taken me 4 years to build toward. Some things are too large to hand to someone you love all at once. I just sat with him on the porch steps and told him simply that I had gotten the company back, that Callaway Group existed again, that his name meant something in the world once more. He didn't speak for a long time. And then Roland Callaway, the man who hadn't fully straightened his shoulders in 18 years, the man who had walked into a kitchen one Tuesday morning and sat down with the weight of a world that had just been taken from him, put his face in his hands and wept, not from sadness, for the first time in as long as I could remember, not from sadness. He lifted his head after a while, looked at me with eyes that were red and overwhelmed and somehow, finally, lighter. And he said, "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." He didn't ask how. He didn't ask what it cost. He just said that. And I held on to those words like they were the only solid thing in the world. Because after everything, after 4 years of silence and sacrifice, and a chess match that nobody saw coming, that was the only victory that had ever truly mattered. Not the deed, not the headline, not the moment Dorian Voss looked across a board and finally understood who he was sitting across from. Just my father, on a Sunday, in the garden, finally able to breathe again. I want you to think about something before you go. Dorian Voss walked into that boardroom believing the most dangerous thing in the room was his own reputation, his track record, his decades of wins stacked so high they had become a kind of armor he no longer even thought about wearing. He looked across that chessboard and saw a young woman who didn't belong there, someone decorative, someone playing at a game she didn't understand in a world that had never been built for her. He never once considered that the most dangerous person in any room is never the loudest one. It is always, always the one who has been quietly preparing while everyone else was busy being certain. That is what nobody tells you about patience. Not the greeting card version of patience, the kind that sounds peaceful and wise and easy to practice. I mean the real kind, the kind that costs something, the kind that asks you to sit with your pain long enough to turn it into precision, to watch someone who wronged you continue to thrive, continue to laugh, continue to move through the world completely unbothered, and choose every single day not to react. Not yet. Not until the moment is exactly right. That kind of patience is not passive. It is the most aggressive thing I have ever done with my life. And I want you to hear this clearly, because I mean every word of it. Whatever has been taken from you, whatever room you were pushed out of, whatever table you were told you didn't belong at, whatever version of yourself someone else decided wasn't enough, that is not the end of your story. It is the Tuesday morning in the kitchen. It is the beginning of the part where you decide what happens next. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to prepare in silence. You are allowed to let the people who underestimated you stay comfortable in that underestimation, right up until the moment you place the piece down and show them exactly what you built while they weren't watching. Dorian Voss lost a chess match, but what he really lost was the belief that power is permanent when it is built on someone else's ruin. It never is. Somewhere in some quiet apartment at some kitchen table, the person whose ruin you built your empire on has a daughter doing her homework, watching, learning, waiting. Karma is not always loud. Sometimes it sits across from you in a simple black dress and says absolutely nothing until it is time to say everything. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching Vivian walk into that room and walk out with everything her father lost, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe right now, because every single week we bring you stories like this one. Stories about people who were counted out and came back. Stories about patience and power and the kind of justice that the world doesn't always hand you, but that you can absolutely build with your own hands if you are willing to do the quiet work. Leave a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Was it the kitchen table, the chess match, the Sunday in the garden when Roland finally wept? I read every single comment. Everyone, and your answer matters to me more than you know. Share this video with someone who is in the middle of their Tuesday morning right now, someone who is sitting with their hands flat on a table, wondering if any of it is worth it, someone who needs to be reminded that the preparation nobody sees is the most important work they will ever do. And if you are that person, if you are the one rebuilding quietly, preparing in secret, carrying something heavy that the world hasn't seen yet, I just want you to know one thing. Your move is coming. Stay ready.